Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Keep Up with Pryme. Today, we're focusing on in law firms. In case we haven't met before, I'm Laura Andradas. I'm marketing lead at Pryme Global, and joining me is Aske Holst, product manager at Pryme Global. We'll see each other at the end of the webinar for the Q&A, so please use the chat in case you have any questions. And now, without further delay, let's get started. And Aske, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. So let's jump right into it. This is the Keep Up with Pryme, and this time it is for law firm. We call it the legal edition. We're changing things around a bit when it comes to releases and how we present our changes. We've switched over to a new release cycle for our Pryme Apps, which is now a plan of 4 major releases per year and minor releases in between. So there will be major releases in November, February, May, and August, and in between there will be minor releases with only minor changes. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to keep up with the changes we are doing. This will also mean that we will only do the Keep Up webinars 4 times a year, not 12 times a year. And we will focus them for each vertical. So currently we are in the webinar for law firms. And in this webinar, we only focus on the areas that could be relevant to law firms. I will not cover features and functionality that are for the construction industry or for non-profit. So hopefully this makes it a little bit more focused and a little bit more interesting for everybody. So what do we have? Well, it's been some time since we had the last Keep Up with Pryme. So this is actually changes going back a couple of months. And there are changes in a number of different areas. I've decided to structure this in the same way we usually talk about the life cycle of a matter, with what is related to setuping, what is related to planning, what is related to the actual work, and what is related to the invoicing and getting paid part of the process, but that could also be actually paying someone else, which we'll see in a short while. So there is a number of different features. Some of them are have been around for a couple of months, but I will mention them anyway. Some are new to the specific November release. But let's get started. So first up, we will look at new features that are related to the setting up of a new matter. And I will say the major change there is the new pricing experience. This is something coming out of the changes that Microsoft are doing. They have introduced, actually quite some time ago, but it is still optional, a new pricing experience. And what we have enabled is for you to use this pricing experience, and that applies both to the outbound price, the price that a client would pay, but it also applies to the cost that you account for internally on the matter. The way this is enabled is through feature management, and there are 2 steps to it. One is the feature management in Business Central, which is called feature management, and the other part is Progresses feature management. So first step would be the feature management for Business Central. There we have a setting for what is called the new sales price experience that needs to be enabled. Enabling this on its own will not change the pricing of resources. It will change how prices on items are set, but that's usually not relevant in the legal space. But this is a prerequisite. This needs to be enabled for this to be functioning. The other part is the feature management for Progresses, where new sales price experience for resources must be enabled. It actually says in here that it will be automatically enabled from version 29. That is a mistake. There is no plan to automatically enable this in the future. This is an optional path that you can take if you find this is more beneficial. If you want to stick with the current pricing model, you can, and there is no plan to eliminate that. So what does change if you change this pricing model? Well, it changes how you set up prices on resources. And there's some pros and some cons to it. On a resource or on a resource group, we could previously set up prices using what is called the progressive resource cost or the progressive resource prices. When new sales price experience resource prices is enabled, these two tables are no longer used. They will still exist, and they will exist for reference. The costing and pricing setup there is not converted into the new model, simply because the Microsoft model is currently more limited than the progressive model, so it is not possible to convert. And an example could be, if I look here in progressive resource cost, I can set up cost in a number of different ways. I can set overtime factors, I can set methods, etc. That does not exist in the standard BC pricing model for resources. Even more so with pricing, where we can have prices that are by subgroup, for instance. That does not exist in the standard BC resource pricing. So there are definitely some limitations on how you can do pricing with the new model. But what you do gain is that there are some capabilities in the standard BC pricing that does not exist in the progressive pricing. So it is a trade-off. In the progressive resource pricing, we cannot set prices by client. That is by far the biggest change. So if you enable the new model and switch over, then you can go in and for a given resource, set up prices, not for the resource itself. Well, it could be for the resource itself, but you can do it related to a client. So I can set up sales prices, create a sales price list. And in my sales price list, here I have a standard price for all clients. I could set something for a specific client, and then it would apply to all the matters that applies to that client. And that is a big change. But it's not, I would say that this is better than the existing model. It is just different. And it definitely requires some testing and some consideration on which model is the best. And it's not a one-to-one match. So it's not a quick changeover from one to the other. The other thing changed in the area of costing and pricing is for expenses. If you have different agreements with different clients where you need a different markup or a different pricing on expenses, this can now be set up with expense price templates. So looking in here, we now not only have sales price templates, but also expense price templates, where you can define that there are different rates on different kinds of expenses. And these template lines can then be applied to different projects. And again, with start dates and end dates and all the things you're used to. So this can make it easier if you want to have different setups for how you're going to recharge your expenses. You can do that in a templated way. It is also possible to set more generic rules on the matters. We call this cross-expense markup, where if you don't want to use the template, but you have a general rule for how expenses should be costed, you can now set this up on the matter itself and define similar to the discounting, you can set up a percentage to add on top of expenses. So there is a new field for adding an expense markup in general. In the area of planning, the big change is what we call project work, or for matters, of course, it would be matters work. It's for tracking work items. This is not directly included with Pryme Matters, but if you have what we call the legal industry package, this is included in the price. And so it is an additional feature that you get included, and you can decide to use it or not. You will need to install the app called Pryme Project Work for it to work. And so what does this do? Well, it allows you to create work items. What is a work item? Well, a work item is a piece of work that is assigned for someone to do. And so on a matter, we could look on a general matter. And on this matter, we can see that we can have different work items showing in here. I have not started work item, in progress work items, and completed work items. I have one in progress work item that I can see here. And this is a review of the contract extension. So this is a piece of work that is assigned to an individual. It might have a start date, it might have a due date, and it is something we want to get done. And we want to track the progress of this, that it is actually being done. So here we are kind of moving some things into what would maybe in some cases would be tracked in some kind of practice management system. So looking at the details, there is a title for it. There is someone assigned. Of course, it could be unassigned. There could be a start date. There could be a due date. And there is some tracking of progress. Currently, this is marked as in progress. There can also be some notes, and there can be a longer description of the work being done. In this case, there is not. Most importantly, there's a checklist. So you can keep track of the details of what is happening. So for things that you're doing over and over again, and you want to have a check on what is being done, maybe especially if it is done by junior staff, this can be a good way to check it. And so when something is done, we have an item here of collect all documents. You could mark this as completed. There could even be specific due dates on the sub items. And these checklist items, they can also be work items in of themselves. So if the review proposal is a big task to be done, I might want to select this one and say, I would like to create this as a new work item, probably for someone else. So I can say this, now I have review proposal. This should be done by Claire. And maybe there's a due date on this as well. This has to be done no later than, let's say, this Thursday. This is now marked as a to-do. It's not started. And this in of itself could even have a checklist. In this case, it does not. So you have this control over what is happening, and you can follow up and make sure that things are done in the right order. If you want to have a bigger overview of what is to do, you don't only have it on the project level. It is also available for each individual as a kind of timeline. There are things that I should have started on. There are things that are due today, due soon, etc. And I can look at this even at a high level with what we call a Kanban board, where I can see what is ongoing. There's some to-dos, there's something in progress, there's something in review. And each company can decide what their process is. What are the different steps? Do we have 2 steps, 3 steps, 17 steps? Even different matters could have different steps in the process. And this, of course, can be viewed in different ways by who it is assigned to. In this case, some is assigned to Claire, some to David, some to Prakash. It could also be by who is the customer. Something is for Adatum, some is for School of Fine Art. Even the columns can be switched around to say, maybe this is more by the due date. What do we have due today? We have something for Adatum Corporation due today. Maybe this is something to look into. Due next week, nothing, but well, yeah, something for School of fine art, etc. So working with work, keeping track of it, this can be a great tool. It also feeds into the time tracking. So if I'm starting work on something, I could start my timer. And when I start my timer, I might just select a work item. I have my review contract extension. I select that. I don't need to know about the matter number or the task code, etc. It will find that from the work item in and of itself. So this can make it a lot easier to track time if you're working with a lot of different small pieces of work. Try it out, have a look. I think there might be some possibilities in this. Moving on to the work part, and we kind of slightly tracked into that with the plan and track work, because this of course is also that you can track your work on work items on your timesheets. There is now a number of new features in timesheets. We can track time on Teams calls. We have a Copilot feature for completing timesheets. It is not considered finished. We call it production ready preview, so you can use it. It should work, but we do not guarantee that there cannot be any mistakes at this point. So we hope to get it to a final production state early next year. There is also a feature that reopen timesheets will only reverse the time entries as needed. And then lastly, we can have resource lines on purchases. Let's have a look. So for tracking time on Teams calls, if I open up my time tracking calendar, I can see in here that I have my calendar. And if I go in and look at the previous week, I can now see that my Teams calls are showing up in here. Not only the calls that were in the calendar, but also spontaneous calls, getting called up on Teams or calling someone else on Teams. And these can, of course, be added to the calendar. So I have something here about matters invoicing process. I could add this to my timesheet very easily. The upside being that you already had the possibility to show your Outlook calendar in here, but the Outlook calendar might not actually show the actual time. In this case, it was a meeting that was planned to be a little bit longer. It was planned to be a 2.5 hour meeting. In actual fact, this was slightly over 2 hours. So I get something that is more precise by looking at the Teams call time instead. We also have the Copilot feature of complete timesheet. And complete timesheet will look at what you have already tracked and what you have in your calendar, what you have in your Teams, but also what you have sent as emails and received as emails, and try to fill in the gaps. It will not try to create an entire timesheet. So if I try this out this week, it will not suggest anything for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday because I have not tracked time. It is not meant to magically create your timesheet. That is not reasonable. But if you have a timesheet with a few gaps, then it can suggest something you might have forgotten. Maybe it can find 20 minutes here, 10 minutes there, but that could make a big difference in the end for your chargeable time. Now, this is hard to show in a demo setup because I need to have a completed timesheet. So this is where I cheat a little bit and switch over to something that is already prepared. And this is it. So this is an example of a timesheet which has a lot of gaps in different places. And this is, of course, intentionally so in order to show this as a scenario. And with this, I can then go ahead, and this is a pre-recorded demo from earlier. So this is why it looks slightly different. I use my complete timesheet feature, and it will look on the different days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, etc. it will look at my emails, my Teams calls, my Outlook calendar, and of course the time I already tracked, trying to identify the gaps and if there is something I did during that time that might fit into there. It will also create a description of why it suggested it, so you can evaluate if it is a reasonable suggestion. In this case, I added, and then we can have a look at it and see what makes sense and what was just random suggestions that were not that good. So here we can see on this entry, there is a Copilot suggestion text saying that this entry fills a gap from 10 to 10:35. The email was sent at 10:35:11. An estimated duration of 18 minutes was used to account for composing the email. Maybe that's reasonable, maybe it's not, but it's a starting point for something I probably forgot to put on my timesheet. So I think it can add value, and it only takes half a minute to run. Maybe it can find some time at the end of the week. The third thing I want to mention was that when you reopen a timesheet, and hopefully you should not need to reopen a timesheet, up until now, the process has been that when you reopened a timesheet that was already approved all the way through, which is often the case if you don't have an explicit approval process, then it would have to reopen all the entries that were created when you resubmit the timesheet. So if you had on a day, I entered 2 hours and time of something, then you reopen the timesheet and submit it again, it would create a negative entry for the 2 hours and a new positive for the 2. This has been made a bit more intelligent in that it only reopens the entries where there are actual changes. So if there's no change, then it doesn't reopen and it doesn't create new entries to apply to it. But of course, if I changed my 2 hours to 2.2 hours, it would create a negative entry for the 2 hours and a new positive for the 2.2. So this should make for a lot less entries when timesheets are reopened. Lastly, within the work area, we now have the capability to use lines of type resource on purchases. So in the past, if we had a purchase invoice, it was not possible to create a new line of the time type resource in here. If you needed to create a line that was of type resource, you would have to select the time GL account, and in the field for the resource number in here, you would then fill in the resource number here. Now, with the November release, you can now select a type of resource and select that resource, select the matter, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't really change anything functionally. You still get the same entries in the end. It just makes it a little bit more logical that resources can have the type of resource. So should make the same. The end result, there should not be any difference. Pricing is the same, costing is the same, the entries created, everything is the same. It just looks a little bit cleaner. That moves us to the last area of functionality, which is the invoicing area. And in this area, there are two functions that are added. One is for the payment of subcontractors. So if you are having some of the work being performed by people outside the company, or even people that are considered to be within the company, but they are invoicing for the time, or they should be paid for the time, they are not actual employees. There is a new functionality called Pryme Project Subcontracting. Again, it is included with the legal industry package, and it can be used for an easier process for paying those subcontractors and making sure that they are getting paid correctly. The way it works is if you have resources, and I have a resource in this case called David, he is a subcontractor. On that resource, I will designate that he is a resource that belongs to the subcontractor 20,000. In this case, this is first up consultants. And so as David is tracking his time, either by me giving him permission to track time directly in our Business Central instance, or him submitting timesheets and I would import them using a matter time journal. Those entries now show up not only as cost for David, but they also show up as something related to, in this case, first up consultants, because first up consultants should be paid for his time. And what we can do is on a periodic basis, let's say monthly, I can open up my subcontractor statements and say, create subcontractor statements. I would like to create for the period of October in this case. And with this, it will go through and find all the resources I have that are subcontractor related and create statements for them. In this case, I got one statement. This was for first up consultants. It is to the value of 944.7. And I can open it up and see what was the work that he performed for us as a subcontractor and what was the value, the number of hours, and also, of course, given a certain rate. Of course, the rate can be different for different matters, but this gives us a total cost for this. This then needs to be approved. That could be an approval process, or it could just be, I'll say this is approved. And now this is marked as being a definitive statement. I can print this statement if I want to send it to them and say, we would like you to send us an invoice. And it should look something like this. The total amount on this should be 944.7 because this is for the work that you submitted and that we agreed to, and this is the rate that we have agreed to. So this can make it a lot easier when you get that invoice to make sure that it is the right invoice. It is possible to also create a self-billing invoice. That is possible in some countries, not all countries, but if you're in a country where self-billing is an option, then you can use this to create a self-billing invoice. And if there's a requirement to have a self-billing agreement, as is the case in the UK, for instance, there will also be a check if there is a valid self-billing agreement in place. If we're not going the self-billing route, then we would expect this company to create a invoice and send it to us, and then we will match it against this number on the subcontract. So let's say we have this situation that we get an invoice. In this case, it is from first up consultants. There's of course a invoice number on it, and hopefully they have matched the total amount. Now, we would not expect them to necessarily match it line by line. So it might just be a general line we get in, and it has an amount on it. And we might get an invoice here for 950. This is what they send us. And hopefully they would enter a reference on here that matches our subcontractor statement. So they would enter something like this. And of course, if we have an AP automation process in place, this would automatically fill in this field. If this is a valid reference for this vendor, it should find it and it should show up down here under the subcontractor statement. And in this case, it did not, probably because I wrote it wrong. And so is a subcontractor statement? There she is, but there's an extra 0. So in this case, I have to match it myself. And it actually says there is a full match. Why does it say full match? Well, the subcontractor statement amount was 944, but I have in my setup allowed for up to 2% of discrepancy, and I will still accept it. This is a setup by me. I could be restrictive and say it needs to be exactly 1-to-1. This is a setup matter. In this case, because it is a full match, I can then post the invoice. If it was not a full match, let's say we got an invoice for 1,000 instead, then it will say, well, it's a partial match. It's close, but it's not even there. So in this case, I would probably ask them to amend the invoice, maybe send me a new, or it could be that they had some extra time that they hadn't accounted for, they forgot to submit it, and then we can have a discussion around that. But this should help a lot if you have a number of people doing work for you on a freelance basis or other kind of work being done for you on your matters. There is a bit more information on this on AppSource as well. So this will also describe what is the process around the project subcontracting and what problems it solves. It also describes the different flows that can be with either self-billing or getting an invoice. If you want to know more, there is a link in here. I'll show it at the end as well for the project subcontracting app, and also, of course, the Pryme Project Work app. I forgot to show one last thing, which is on the invoicing side. We now allow a new kind of splitting of invoicing. So if we look at a project and I open up, or a matter, and I open up the matter card, we in the past had the concept of client splitting. This still exists, but there is now a new option in here, which is called the task billing method. And this allows you to not have only one client, but multiple clients. This is by task. It is not in any other direction. And so it is not the same as the split where you take everything and split it out multiple ways. This is if you have one matter and want some distinctive, discrete parts being billed to one client and other discrete parts being billed to another client. Then you can switch it over. And then on the matter, on each task, you can designate a client to pay for that task. If I switch this, it is a one-way process. You cannot switch it back again. So if I try to switch here, it will tell me this is an irreversible change. You cannot change it back. If I say yes, then it'll make that change. And here it actually says you cannot because you're already working on it and you have entries open that are in process. So it needs to be done early in the life cycle of a matter. So it is really, because it is a reversible process, there's a lot of checking around and making sure it can only be done if it is safe to do so. But if it is done, then you will be able to, on each of the tasks here, to select which client should be invoiced for that task. And of course, multiple tasks can have the same client. And then it will split out the invoices when you run the invoice creation. But do not mistake it as an alternative to split billing, where it is a percentage split. It is something else. This should cover what we had on the agenda today for the different new features. I want to round off with talking a little bit about the roadmap for the future and what we planned here that are relevant for law firms and the legal space. This is a preliminary roadmap. It is not a guarantee that this will happen. There will be more features that are not mentioned here, and some of them could be changed to come earlier or later, or not at all. So for February, we will have better permission sets, and we will do additional improvements to the time calendar. In May, we are hoping to be able to deliver time tracking outside of Business Central. This is one of the things that we have talked about for a very long time. We know it has been a major wish from many companies to be able to do time tracking without opening up Business Central. So what we hope to be able to deliver is some kind of window, at least in the first iteration, that you can run that is outside of Business Central, small window that you have on your desktop where you have some time tracking features. On a further timeline, this could also mean having time tracking inside of other apps, Teams, for instance. It could be inside of maybe documents or inside of Outlook. But we're starting with the cleaner scenario of having it in an app outside that you can run on your desktop without having the full Business Central UI open. For the August release, we will be focusing on descriptions. So we hope to be able to deliver a description editor where you can edit multiple texts or narratives for different time entries. There would also be a description policy checker where you would, based on a policy document, check the descriptions. And this goes hand in hand with better description suggestions. We have already the description improvements, but this is the next step in that journey, having something that looks further, probably together with the policy documents, and make some better suggestions on how to make description improvements. I'll probably talk a bit more about this when we get a little bit closer. So this is the current roadmap. Again, have a look at our subcontracting and work apps. If you are on a legal industry package, these are included in the price. And if you are not on a legal industry package, have a talk to your sales representative and ask them about it. That's all I had for this presentation, and back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Aske. We do have a question. It has to do with work items. And it would be, is it necessary to assign a work item, or can you leave it empty and enable everyone on a project to complete the task? Can others complete the task even though someone else is assigned to the task?
Yes, that is a really good question. So it is not necessary to assign a work item to anyone. You can leave it empty and track the progress, absolutely. The one limitation is that when it comes to time tracking, only the people who are currently assigned or have at some point in time been assigned to that task will get it as a suggested work item to track their time on. Because we don't want to pollute the list of work items you can track time on with all the work items across everybody in the company. It makes sense to show the work items that you are assigned to or have been assigned to historically. So with that limitation, if you don't need it for the time tracking part of it, yes, absolutely. You don't need to ever assign anybody to it. It can just stay unassigned. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Okay. So it looks like we have no further questions. As always, if a question pops up later, please send it to us and we'll take care of it as soon as we can. And thanks for joining us today. And we'll see each other at the next Keep Up with Pryme edition. Have a good day. Goodbye.
Bye.